This film has been made for various reasons. I had originally intended this to be a book. I might still put that together, but for now I've made it into a film. And it's about my visits to cathedrals and churches and how they've affected me and how they should affect each one of us. I like to enter a cathedral through the main double doors, though this is not always possible in some cathedrals, such as Glasgow and Salisbury. I then like to turn left when I walk through the main double doors and walk around the building from the left along to the end, which is normally the end chapel, and back up along what would be the right side of the church, and then back down to the centre. So kind of like a clock. I walk from 6 o'clock around to 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock, back round to 3 o'clock, back to 6 o'clock. But then what is time? Do I love time? Do I have time for the divine? Cathedrals are places where anyone can go, a place where anyone is welcome, a place where one can find oneself and feel the presence of the divine. Yet the divine is also everywhere, omnipresent. But these places, these sanctuaries that are directed towards the divine, where one feels more in the presence of the divine compared to one's home, car, workplace, they're designed for us to remember the divine and for our relationship to the divine. Now, why do I say the divine rather than God? It's something I have a few issues with, of putting a gender on God, though maybe I will slip up in this film and say he sometimes. I feel like the feminine side of it would be more of the Holy Spirit, and of course Mother Mary. And I will come to that later on in this film. So when I'm referring to God, I find it a bit awkward. I don't really like putting a gender on, but for the ease of this film, sometimes I will say the word God, though I do, like I say, prefer the divine source in the masculine. Cathedral, Latin cathedra, seat of a bishop, church of a bishop. Chapels from capella, meaning little cloak or in the chapel style. And the cathedral is the principal church of the diocese. There always seems to be some kind of myth about cathedrals, especially the old ones, the ones that are quite a few hundred years old, as to who actually designed them. Obviously the more modern cathedrals of the last 150 years, we have the designers' names and the groups of people, the builders, the masons who did actually build them. That is recorded, and I'll come to that with a few of the more modern cathedrals when I come to it. So some say this was a hidden blueprint that was found, maybe by the Templars, maybe by the Masons. Blueprints to help build what we would call the Gothic cathedrals. And these were built with a harmonic resonance. They're fabulous, huge, gigantic buildings that even today we could perhaps wonder, how did they build them without the machinery that we have in modern day? So they're built to a harmonic resonance to capture the prayers, the hymns, the music that reverberates through our bodies and through the building, helping us to align with the divine. Some think that the time had come in the times just after the Crusades, of when these cathedrals started appearing on our land. The time had come to make these harmonic temples, which some say hold the stories in stone of how to develop our souls, how to connect to God. The old stories from the Old Testament and the new stories from the New Testament. And we can even look at it here that they are stone buildings, music in stone. What is a cathedral for? Well, it has many different functions. Obviously it gives services to the divine for people. Prayers are read out. Weddings can be performed there, baptisms, and of course death. A lot of funerals and masses for people of those whose soul has passed on to the next realm. It is a centre for communion and community. It's difficult to decide of whether to use the words exoteric and esoteric in this film. On the surface, most of this is exoteric, just services for the people. But for many, there is an esoteric side to it, going deeper, looking into the mystic and the profound, the inner workings of what these cathedrals can do to ourselves. And there are two sorts of knowledge in the world: the exoteric, the more outside looking of what these churches and cathedrals can do for us, and the esoteric, which is the inner workings upon ourselves. But people are drawn to these cathedrals, whether it's for religious, spiritual implications, or just for historical investigation, or even architectural awe, and the musical wonders that these cathedrals put on. We have many visitors, from tourists to pilgrims from all over the world. Are they put there for people to go into and hope to hear the Master's voice? What brings one to such a sacred place? Does one come out transformed, elevated, improved? I believe so. I believe that's what these buildings are there for, to help us to develop ourselves. I prefer to call them harmony saloons, because there is a sense of harmony within them if one takes the time to pause, to think, to be at one, to connect with the divine source. They help to harmonize the inner workings and the outer workings. Guy Underwood, in his book The Pattern of the Past, writes about how so many churches and cathedrals are built upon ancient sacred sites, sites that the pagans or the druids, or we don't know who, erected monoliths upon earth energy lines and water lines. These builders of the megalithic avenues, the megalithic circles and such like, or whoever they were, erected these giant megalithic stones weighing many tons, stones with quartz in them. And it's interesting to see that these same places were then had the cathedrals built upon them, which were usually built with a particular kind of stone. There is also the link between the sun and megaliths, and a link between sun and cathedrals. Sunstones. The ancients watched the skies, took note of the planets' positions as well as the stars in the night sky, especially the largest star of all, the sun. Many of the megalithic alignments of old aligned to the rising and setting of the sun and moon at solstices and equinoxes. Cathedrals are built to let in the light, and a cathedral is usually dedicated to a saint, and each saint has a day dedicated to him or her, and on their special day the sun will rise in line with the east door. It's interesting also that the important services in a cathedral are given on a Sunday, the day dedicated to the sun. Pope Gregory the Great had ordered that many of the churchmen and builders had to take over pagan sacred sites and build upon them the churches and cathedrals that we see today. I'm now going to quote from Guy Underwood. When the site had been selected, the first step would have been to make a plan of its geodetic lines and blind springs. This would show the architect exactly where he could or could not locate the various parts of his structure, and his problem would be to design it in compliance within the geodetic conventions, but also in as rectangular and apparently functional and logical a manner as possible, such as would not disclose the principles which had dictated any necessary deviations from the norm. End quote. What Guy Underwood is saying here is that many of these cathedrals were built upon the underground springs that many of the ancients were building their megalithic structures upon, as if they were aware of where all the earth energy lines are, whether they're above ground or below ground. Rochester is the second oldest cathedral. I often visit this cathedral. These pictures are from the 1st of July 2024, when there was a giant dragon installation in it. So what is a dragon? A mythical creature? Did they once roam the earth? Are they possibly extinct? Perhaps hunted down by us humans? Or perhaps they are now asleep in the earth or in a mountain den? Why are they associated with dark forces? In most cathedrals there are usually depictions of St. George slaying the dragon or Archangel Michael subduing the dragon. He's redeeming the dragon. As I say, I often visit Rochester Cathedral, but in this year, 2024, it was the Chinese year of the dragon. In the Chinese zodiac, each year is represented by an animal, and in this year it is the dragon. The stained glass windows at Rochester and on the wall and in the little chapel have dragons depicted on them. There was this dragon installation, Draco Rofensius, to commemorate the 900 years of the Textus Rofensius, which was, this dragon installation was designed by Windy Doors. And it was made of 12,500 gold, silver and copper foil, all sewn into wire panels. And you can see it here flying in the nave. The wings have written upon it quotes taken from the Textus Rofensius, which is a medieval manuscript that is a collection of all the laws and punishments of the time. In this church, or this cathedral, one feels the deep past hovering around. All this is connected with England's past. The past and the present are connected. They keep us connected with our ancestors and reminds us that there is a future. On the wall there is the Fortuna Wheel. This was designed in the medieval times. Fortuna, who spins the wheel for one and all. What is your fortune foretelling? The dragon can also symbolise the animalistic side within ourselves. Do we want to slay the dragon or subdue the dragon? We have to work upon our animal instincts so that we can help develop ourselves to become a better human being. And in mythology, dragons are often protecting themselves and all their gold and silver. They like shiny things that they keep in their dragon's cave, protecting everything. Maybe the dragon is there to protect the gold and silver that is within you, the treasures that are within you. Keep those treasures shiny and bright, and the dragon will watch over you for all your life. Many smaller churches are locked up and one has to either book a visit or ask for a key, which I think is a shame. Surely the doors should be open constantly so that one and all can at any time enter these sacred spaces, whether for quiet contemplation or a chat with the Lord, or does the Lord answer in his own mysterious ways? I have often asked why the doors are locked. The usual reply is to keep out thieves. Then why not man or woman be allowed into these places? The second most common reason was to stop the homeless sleeping in them, and that irked me a little bit. Surely the Lord would want to welcome those with and without homes into his house. I commend St. James Piccadilly at the time of writing, and for many years before. They allowed the homeless to find refuge in the day on their pews. They were usually directed to the left-hand side so as not to disturb parishioners' prayers with their snores. I headed to Leeds. There is the beautiful St. Anne's Catholic Church Cathedral and St. Peter's Minster. What's the difference between a cathedral and a minster? Well, this minster was built in the 1800s. The minster with its black wood interior and bright stained glass. One walks through the entrance. There's a giant starred glass of Jacob asleep on his stone, oblivious to the angels who ascend the ladder above him. I'm wondering if this connects to the stone Celtic cross found in the church, where I think Vidar is depicted. Who were these ancients, these Anglo-Saxons who erected Celtic stone crosses across our land? For many of us they are our ancestors. What do these Celtic patterns on the crosses depict? This is still up for debate. The Celtic cross itself, the Celtic cross that leads to the rosy cross and then on to the rosy crucians. At St. Anne's I use the holy water. What is holy water? Why, it is us being baptized in the eternal light. Light a candle, the light, the eternal everlasting flame. I love to light a candle. I usually light 3, the first for Christ, the second for my family, the third for the world. One can normally purchase it in the cathedrals, a small bottle of holy water, a few candles to cleanse ourselves and our home. Though one priest did say to me once that he was concerned why people took holy water and what they were doing with it, hinting at a satanic use of it. Can holy water be desecrated? He told me anything holy can be used for its opposite. I wish I'd asked him, Christ's love too? Surely Christ's love is untarnished, incorruptible, because it is unconditional. I wonder what his reply would have been. So I light a candle, the eternal flame we must ignite in our heart for the Sun King. So in Leeds Minster we had the old Celtic cross in the new Minster built in the 1800s, but there's been a church on that site for hundreds of years. Here we can pray for our deceased ancestors. Do they join us in prayer? The spirit world with the church. The cross symbolism has developed over time, and it reminds me of Bill Hicks, who said, when Jesus comes back, does he ever want to see a cross? And he goes on to talk about the fish symbol for Christ, Christ, the fisher of men. Christ came in the age of Pisces, the age of teachers. People are waiting for Christ to come back, but I wonder if it's not a physical comeback, but something more subjective, more personal to each individual. Not I, but Christ in me. Awaken the Christ in our heart. At the crucifixion, and at his transformation, he inserted a shard of himself into every heart that is lying dormant, awaiting us to awaken to it, to connect with it. And this is part of what Rudolf Steiner talks about in his Christ lectures. He says, I let faith germinate within me. I let love germinate within me. Then will faith and love permeate me throughout my entire body. The sacred heart that Christ points to within himself. There are statues and depictions of Christ pointing to his heart everywhere. Too many are waiting for Christ. Not enough making the effort to find Christ within. An inner revelation which leads to inner transformation. Feeling the Christ, sensing the Christ, knowing the Christ brings a sense of peace with one, an understanding of true love, as in unconditional love, a trust and faith in the divine. The Jacob's Ladder depiction on the glass wall at Leeds Minster has Jacob fast asleep, unaware of the angels, like most of us in life. I visited Chichester Cathedral on summer solstice 2024. It was a full moon. There was a nice welcome from the welcomers at the big front door, who gave us a little history about St. Richard. On the entrance into the cathedral there's a giant statue of St. Richard. He watches over one and he holds out a hand welcoming us all in. On the left side of the entrance there is a muscular gold-coloured Christ with crown. I found that the St. John the Baptist Chapel to be very special. This was a couple of days before Midsummer's Day, St. John's Day. There was also a Christ statue in a glass case, Christ on Judgment Day. It blew me away. It's a black statue with a gold crown. And the lady priest of the cathedral noticed me looking at it and explained that this was a model version. And she made me step back into the centre of the cathedral and pointed upwards to where the actual giant statue was, up high, where one cannot see it properly. But I thought, what a wonderful depiction of Christ sitting in judgment. Christ on Judgment Day, looking down upon us all. Every hour on the hour, short prayers were being given by the lady priest, who's dressed in her black robes. It was the same lady who showed me the Christ at Judgment Day. The main glass window showed Christ risen with various Old Testament scenes all around him. We ended up discussing the snake on the cross and the snakes in the air and the sky. Remember, Lucifer owns the sky. I stayed for the evening prayer in the sanctuary at the back with the Holy Eucharist, or the sacristy, I should say, at the back with the Holy Eucharist. It was a delight to see Christ in the face of the lamppost shades, walking with the light, Christ's light from the lamp. It was lovely seeing Christ's lit face beaming down upon us as we walked through the dark alleys. The Sun King, still alight at night. This is a quote by Guy Underwood from his book The Pattern of the Past about Chichester Cathedral. The nave is centred on a straight acrostat, as in the case of all cathedrals I have surveyed. The structure is remarkably irregular, and an architect told me that there is hardly a line that is straight or a corner that is rectangular in the whole building. The choir is out of line with the nave, and the Lady Chapel is askew. The separate belfry of the cathedral marks an important terminal spiral." End quote. The next day, the day before Midsummer, I went to Arundel Castle, and I could see it from the train hanging high in the English countryside. Getting off at Ford Station, waiting for a connection, looking at it in the distance. It's on top of a hill. The cathedral to the left, the castle to the right. At Arundel train station I lost sight of it. I'd forgotten the town was one big hill, but I'd not been for a while. It'd been a few years. The turrets and towers looked down upon me as I walked up the hill. It was a Sunday, so when I arrived I could hear the choir singing. I peeked through glass doors, pleased to see an almost full congregation. I didn't want to disturb, so I did not enter, but wandered around outside, looking at gargoyles and brickwork. After the service I went in and did my usual turn to the left, and was stunned at the first stained glass window. Christ as an angel, Christ with all wings. I stood looking at that for a while and kept returning to it. The cathedral had a warmth to it, and not just because there had been a service, though I'm sure that added to it, but it seemed to have a lightness and a whiteness about it. There were lots of depictions of the Christ risen, pointing to his heart, the Holy Eucharist depicted in the huge stained glass windows, the archangels statues at the end of each altar, superb giant stained glass windows of archangels. May the archangels look down upon us all. I went to Glasgow Cathedral on a full moon of Halloween weekend of 2023, St Mungo's. I actually found it quite a dark and gloomy cathedral, the side entrance. It was rarely open. There seemed to be no services at all, or there wasn't at that time, and we had to go in through the side door. I felt the whole cathedral was just glorifying war, though the crypt was pretty awesome, and I liked the picture of like a modern billboard of Jesus Christ. There were sun-stained glass windows inside, but most of them were heralds of various officers and departments of war. I went back a couple of times to check the atmosphere, but it did remain the same. It had a green roof and spires. It looked grand from afar, especially from the necropolis. I actually felt and had a more satisfying experience at a little church across the city, full of Viking megaliths, which I've also done a video of, so do check through my videos. It was Govon Old Church. It had welcoming staff. It was a welcoming church inside. It was bright. The sun shone that day, lighting up the entrance and the standing stones and the stained glass. The sunstone, or the sun stain, was carved back in ancient times, depicting the sun. It seemed to attract the outside sun to it. Christ is a sun king and attracts the sun's rays to him. He beamed bright rays out to all who are willing to receive them. Even in olden times the people understood the sun, its power and its meaning. See this symbolism in these Viking sunstones, and they had their connection to the sun. And of course there are different meanings to the sun. There's the exoteric and the esoteric. The sun in the cosmos, the exoteric. Its light takes 8 minutes to reach us. It gives us daylight, helps us to grow, photosynthesis, etc. It warms us when it is close in the summer. It lights the moon, because the moon obviously is not a light. It reflects the sunlight. There is still debate as to how the moon or the sun powers itself, and how far away it is, how big it is. Problems such as skin cancer, no sun cream, I say, though that's obviously up to you. The old beings didn't have sun cream on. We bake in the sun. So all these churches and cathedrals that say that these dedications to those soldiers and the war effort
is for in remembrance. I do wonder if it's just the dark forces have taken over the churches and the cathedrals and feed off that vibration of remembering the dead that died in battle, making war glorified. So you've got to remember, Christ came in the name of peace. No more war. He wanted peace everywhere.
Why is forgiveness so hard when people annoy us so easily? Forgiveness is a powerful energy. It gives a release and transforms anger and resentment into a much finer emotional force. Forgiveness takes those ill thoughts against those that hurt us and transforms them into understanding. Somebody once said to me that when they started to truly forgive somebody of their ill deeds towards them, they began to see that torturer in a new light. She pitied him and wanted to understand him. At first I struggled with this. How could she forgive this perpetrator of his heinous crimes? I sat in this church in Marylebone pondering on this, struggling with my own thoughts to those who trespassed against me. It was whilst I was sitting there that one of the vergers read out the Lord's Prayer, a prayer I've recited over and over for years in the morning assembly of my primary school. Our Father, who art in heaven. And then it reminded me of the line, as we forgive those who trespass against us, forgive us our trespasses. The words pricked at my conscience. I'd sinned against God, I'd sinned against fellow human beings, and they have sinned against me. A whole lot of forgiveness needed to be going on. This prayer also began to have new meaning to me, no longer a repetition instilled by my peers, but the words began to come alive to me. I felt them inside and outside of me. It was a revelation for me. These words are so powerful, and if I said them consciously and with intention, they made a connection. Their magical power lit up. The words came alive. The beginning reminded me of the Word of God in the Old Testament. In the beginning was the Word. The Word, God spoke the Word, and the Word was created. That's magic. Witches, wizards, sorcerers, and magi, look forwards and fill them with power to use in a spell. Words are creative. We can hurt each other with words. We can heal each other with words. When used with intention and not just said mechanically, as I hear so many speak these days, I hear conversations on phones, on trains, girls to parents or boyfriends wanting something at the end of which, or arguing. Like a programmed practice, they say, love you, and hang up. Do they? Or is this the way people say goodbye now? Or maybe they do genuinely love each other, and passing these words on enforces the love vibe. I see people who have been constantly shouted down or berated within their life, a flower that has no sun. That's the power of words. We need more uplifting words. We need prayers said with more earnest and care. Make these prayers worthwhile. Make these prayers have an effect. Say them in such a way that the angel messengers take them up to the divine, the celestial messengers. Does saying them in a sacred place, such as a church or cathedral, matter? Maybe. But I live in hope that a prayer said in earnest, with meaning, honestly could be heard by the divine hierarchy, if said from the heart, from anywhere in the world, from anywhere in the cosmos. My personal struggle was that I was too proud to ask God for help. I wanted to show God I could do everything myself, which I tried to do, and made a right old mess of it. Pride is the first of the deadly sins. And what comes with it? A fall, in both senses of the word. Off to York Minster I went. Down in the crypt is the statue of the Hellmouth. Up above in the hall is the Christ painting, Christ coming from the sky. My mission to visit York Minster was to walk in the steps of those before me. One of my favourite artists is John Martin, but his brother, Jonathan Martin, was the one that had such anger about the church and its institution that he tried to burn York Minster down from the choir he hid in there at night and set it afire. I have done a film about that already. Anger with the church institution still prevails today. People often confuse and mix up God's will with religious institutions' will. God gave us free will. Religious institutions have a reputation for preaching and telling us their understanding of God's will. God's representative on earth is not necessarily who we think it to be. Why would God send representatives to speak on his behalf? In biblical times, in the olden days, the prophets were the spokespersons. Few hear God directly. Is God picky on who he speaks through? Or are some people just not attuned to hearing God speak? For a belief in God is always reaching down to us, but how many of us are reaching up? He might not answer our prayers or grant our wishes. He might not interfere in wars and such like due to the free will, but he is always waiting for us to turn to him. In this minster there is also an astrological clock. Though it says in the Old Testament, do not divine, God did put them stars in the sky for us to read. They're like messages from him. And we should be looking up to the skies, for Christ will be coming in the clouds, reaching down to us, welcoming us. If not God, then Christ, who said, one goes to the Father through him. People want him to come down and sort out all the injustices in the world, but then would us rebellious humans listen? Though Christ teaches forgiveness, we must also look at responsibility, being responsible for our own faults, our own actions and our own decisions. We get bullied by monsters. Who will stand up to them? We need to take responsibility as to why people become monsters, understand how they have become like that, be aware that there are many wolves in sheep's clothing. The Cathedral Church of Christ in Liverpool. Though one of the newest built, it felt like one of the oldest and truest. It's also the largest. One can feel the divine within. In fact, it felt divine. Made with William Morris bricks. I do love a bit of William Morris. It is the 8th largest cathedral in the world. The statue at the entrance over the doorway. Here is the man. The immenseness of this building cannot be overstated. It makes one feel very small, but as one should do in front of the divine. But it has an uplifting atmosphere, both physically and spiritually. The chapel on the left had a golden statue of Christ. Downstairs there was a chapel to Mary, the Lady Chapel, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, blessed be. There was renovation going on in the choir and apse. We never got to go into there. William Morris died before this cathedral was built, but you can definitely feel the builders of the William Morris Society built this building with love. The architect is Giles Gilbert Scott. There's a definite feeling of reverence, but also of life being lived. Perhaps it's the newness, having only been finished in 1979. This building carries a vibrant life force, eager as a child to reach out and connect with everyone. Those big stone, strong bricks make it immense. One feels awe at how these arches stay up, yet the vast space above in the high ceiling, one felt the Holy Spirit could gather in and spiral down in a dance to those below. One has to walk up the hill to it, like a true path of pilgrimage, going up to the divine, going up to the sanctuary. It was not cluttered with iconography, or people, or chairs. It was very spacious. One does not feel one is trespassing in another space. One's space is not being trespassed upon. Being a believer in energies and human beings, able, usually unconsciously, to affect each other with one's subtle energies, I stood there, next to a stranger, but we did not interact. We were both just all in awe at what we were feeling and seeing. It felt like everything seeps out of one and affects the surrounding atmosphere, the atmosphere you are standing in, you are occupying. Good vibrations. Not being too happy-clappy, but how we feel affects the area. So living in a more harmonious way means one feels more harmonious and is thus emitting harmonious vibes out, which affect other people. Obviously, crap happens and we are affected by it ourselves. But do we learn a protection or learn to stay on a higher vibration? Feel the love, feel the peace, feel the serenity. Be the love, be the peace, be the serenity. In Manchester we went to the cathedral that was formerly St Mary, St Denis's and St George's. It is a Gothic revival. I remember it being dark, not much light getting in due to the towers. Mammon, the towers of the shopping malls hung all round it, and the football museum was beside it. On my visits to the cathedral it felt cold and lonely, and there were very few visitors and fewer at the services. In fact, this was the only cathedral I went to where it wasn't almost full at the services. One can feel the dark weight of Mammon bearing down upon it, trying to squeeze out any spirituality from it. The saying, getting blood from a stone, kept popping into my head. So next to it towers the Museum of Football. I worked in football for 12 years, and as the local teams always like to remind me, football is a religion. I attended evening song every evening. It was on my last day that there was a very sombre feeling. The priest kept giving prayers for the health and soul of the Queen, but then he said something which I cannot remember properly, but I know he had realised he had slipped up, and I wish I could remember his exact words, but it was a comment that revealed the Queen had died. It was the 8th of September 2022. It had not been officially announced yet. There were very few of us at the service, only a handful, if that, and nobody else had noticed what he'd just announced. Death. Cathedrals display a lot of death. Tombs, statues to dead people, depictions of Jesus Christ's death, funerals, war memorials, and many people think of death as being the time when they may not meet God, God Almighty. God is life. He is living. We should make connections with God while we are alive. Though Nietzsche said God is dead. Why not encounter God in life? These buildings, these cathedrals try to show you how to live a life. These buildings, these cathedrals try to show you how to die and be reborn in a symbolic way. These buildings and cathedrals try to show you how to live life anew with God. Nobody wants to die, but everybody does, except the prophet Elijah. And Christ died, but he was resurrected. Few take it on board that one day they will cease to be. Gurdjieff's advice is, if we consider that we all die, yourself, myself, each person you lay eyes upon, will die one day. It will change how we all treat each other. What is death? What happens after it? Do we live on? Do you believe that you have a soul that is eternal, or do you think that once you are dead, you are dead, you are obliterated, it is over, there you are no more? These are questions everybody probably comes across at some point in their life. Some dismiss such thoughts, some ponder on them deeply. Some believe they know, or have a belief they know what's going to happen after they have died. Some are scared of death, scared of what comes with it. Fear comes from lack of understanding. Fear, as Yoda reminds us in the Star Wars movies, leads to the dark side. When one is fearful, all kinds of negative thoughts and emotions scramble about in one, causing paranoia, unsettledness, nervous activity, and one becomes uncentered and on edge, suspicious of everything and everyone. It probably doesn't help for centuries certain churches and its priests have put the fear of God into people by preaching that we are all sinners. Sinners are not worthy. A misinterpretation, methinks, of the Holy Scriptures, especially the New Testament. The Old Testament is full of stories of an angry God, but Christ came in the Gospels with a new message of a more loving, caring God who will welcome one and all at death. That will annoy some folks, but it is not as simple as that. Christ is all forgiving. Christ is love, yet those who are sinners on this earth will still face some kind of punishment or purgatory. And this all leads to redemption. Better on earth redemption than later after death, but this leads to reincarnation, and all will be welcomed when one is ready. One should be in fear of God if one is doing wrong to others, purposely hurting others. Those who are harmed, who live in fear, they mistake that a God will be a domineering character like the bully who is harming them. God created us in his physical image, but he left the inner part of each person to develop in their own way. Each baby who is born is an innocent baby looking to be loved and cared for. There is no character yet of who that baby will grow into. That is developed from early childhood by his or her peers, parents, and such like. How we raise children has a big effect on what sort of adult they become. We must teach peace. Do we want them to become scared minions, fearful humans, or loving, upright humans who trust in God, trust in themselves, and trust in others? The counterbalance to fear is love. Security comes with love, but there are many types of love. Brotherly love, sexual love, romantic love, and so on. I am talking about the love Christ brings, unconditional, compassionate love. But if that is not good enough for you, try this golden rule. Do unto others what you would have done to yourself. There will always be exceptions to the rule. Those who want to disrupt, cause havoc, usually they are people who are hurting themselves. But this is a spiritual path, which aids one in a better, more secure lifestyle, and the only way we can get along, or on board, is to make men and women, teenagers and children, recognize the world is not just about them, but also the other men, women, teenagers and children who also roam it, are sharing this world. They live on this world with us. They have a life path with us. Cathedral buildings should be teaching peace. Winchester, the city of the old kings and queens. It used to be the capital of London. And of course it has the stories of Arthur here. Many kings and queens ruled from this city. Many kings and queens got married in this city. Many kings and queens got married in the cathedral, one of the most famous being Mary, who now became Mary Queen of Scots, daughter of Henry VIII, that was married in this cathedral. Now I find it interesting that the welcome banner into the cathedral had the free dancing hares, or some people call it the free chasing hares, often regarded as a pagan symbolism. Again, not many people seem to understand or know what the hare represented, but here it is depicting the Holy Trinity. I actually found this old cathedral very comfortable, very warming, a warmth of spiritual warmth. I came here on winter solstice of 2024 and it was a very cold day. The evening before winter solstice I attended the Christmas carol service here, which was absolutely full of people. It was chock-a-block, which was good to see that so many people had come out for this. But the next night there were queues round the corner for the carol service, because sadly there had been the day before the attack on a Christmas market in Germany by I call them possessed by the dark forces, but of course it was a terrorist attack. And that kind of thing does bring more people out to worship. But this cathedral was already very full of people before this happened. So people still have respect for this cathedral, this city, for the Christ. And as I wandered round it, I got to see the Mary and Gabriel window, the stained glass, which I'd been told that I would absolutely adore, which I did, and I was very lucky to sit next to that during the Christmas carol service. And of course it is the birth, well, when I'm making this film of Winchester, is Christmas time, solstice time, Yule time. This scene of the Annunciation happened 9 months before. I did like this Christ looking down upon us. It had some very modern statues in this church. And to me it seemed like there was 2 eyes above, the eyes of the divine, looking down upon its Son, the Christ, who was then looking down upon us, with his arms open and welcome. Please note he's not actually on a crucifix. One of my favourite parts of the Winchester Cathedral was the Angel Chapel. The Guardian Angel Chapel. We all need our guardian angels at the moment. Guardian angels need to come down and tell us what we should be doing in this chaotic world that we're living in. But I loved it that the angels were painted onto the ceiling above and looked down upon us, and next door to them was the wonderful Joan of Arc. I believe that she was spoken to by a guardian angel. In the Mary Chapel, which was next to the Guardian Angel Chapel and the statue of the Joan of Arc, there were some beautiful old paintings of Mary performing miracles, and the ceiling above had some wonderful depictions of Mary in them. Mother Mary, may she watch over us all. As I walked along the cathedral, I came across the stained glass for forgiveness, which is much needed in this crazy world that we live in. Forgiveness is a very strong vibration, and I know more and more people are finding it very difficult to forgive for the atrocities that are happening in the outside world and to themselves. This cathedral has the bones of the old kings, which are up in these coffers, up above the aisles, looking up towards the divine. One of my favourite chapels again was the Christ Chapel, where he sat there in his throne, looking down upon us with loving eyes and open arms, a sign of peace, obviously. I actually found it very comfortable and peaceful in all these little chapels. In fact, the whole cathedral just had a vibe of peace about it, even though it was so busy with tourists and people visiting. I was very lucky to get the crypt to myself at one stage, with the Anthony Gormley statue inside it. It was, well, words can't express it. I'm filling up even as I talk about it. I felt it overwhelming in the sense that down here in this crypt, you can see that statue, you can feel the water taking your emotions along. You can feel the Christ and God looking down upon you. Down the aisle of this fabulous cathedral were these fantastic pastel banners, and I could never find out who the artist was. The vergers were always busy because it was so busy in there, and there was no information that I could find, though there was a lot of Christmas decoration going on around the cathedral, so maybe the sign for who made this artwork was hidden behind some tinsel or something. But this artwork absolutely stunned me. It was as if it was whoever this artist was able to see into the spiritual realms and to see God, Christ, and the dark forces all coming together in their different realms. The depictions of the higher hierarchies, the Divine Mother, the Divine God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, the dark forces being shut down into the abyss, the Christ working his way down to forgive and redeem the dark forces, and ourselves, the dark forces that are within us. Winchester Cathedral, that carries forth the old and welcomes the new. Salisbury Cathedral. We shouldn't have favourites, but alas we do, don't we? And Salisbury Cathedral is probably mine. The Sun Cathedral. I try to visit here as often as I can. I love this cathedral. I have a sense of homecoming every time I visit, and I have the same feeling at Stonehenge close by and Old Sarum. Was I here in a past life, or do I have good impressions on this from my last recurrence? It always makes me chuckle, the alien spaceship outside. It always reminds me of my phase of believing all the gods of the past were beings from other planets, solar systems maybe, ever far away. Were we humans created by gods, aliens, or Anunnaki, or Demiurge, which I can lean towards these days? Yet, all in all, we know there is a divine source behind everything. My favourite part of the cathedral is the unicorn, but it's very hard to take a photo of here because it's so high up. The crown of thorns I always find upsetting, though I like the eternally burning candle in it, a way to keep the light with Christ and a reminder of his suffering. The flowing water feature, a gentle sound of the constantly flowing of the divine source, the flowing force of love that comes from the Christ, always. People still have connotations about Jesus Christ. Few understand, many misunderstand, the majority declare that they are not religious. I think that many believe that they have turned away from the church due to its bad reputation for being an institution, or its piousness, or, all the trouble, the scandals, that should really be the ruin of any church. After deep conversations with various people, I also note many do not follow a religious path at all because of the moral implications it brings up. It makes people uncomfortable because it means that they have to look at themselves and their own actions. It's easy to judge and point a finger at others, especially their bad actions, but not so easy to look at one's own. Alas, nobody is perfect, but there is always room for improvement. But who wants to improve? Many like who they are, or what they do. Humans are imitators. We either like to keep up with the Joneses or be the Joneses leading the way. We have a herd mentality, so we see one person behaving in a certain way and we then repeat it. We see somebody get away with something and we try to do the same. What stops most of us doing bad things is the common law. Many of us don't murder that annoying neighbour because we fear the consequences of getting caught and going to prison. In olden days, we'd have that same mentality regarding our religious side of life. We want to get into heaven, not go to hell, so we'd follow the moral rules laid down by our biblical texts. But we live in a secular society where things like money, TV and sport are now new religions. These things bring people together as a social order, but often divide us too. People often come to church and cathedrals to pray for one of these three. I wonder if the divine is interested in how much money you make, what TV program you are watching, or which team wins the football. The divine is more interested in your spiritual development and, of course, of your soul. The churches and cathedrals depict how to save your soul in their decor. People are drawn to these places because the building rings out, figuratively and literally, a divine truth, calling people to them to come and get connected. But the secular world can be overpowering, and many people do not heed that call through fear of ridicule and programmed superstition. Programmed superstition, the age of rationality and reason, that tells us the mind rules, not the heart. The age of rationalism and reason that tells people that religious thought and feeling is old hat and built upon the superstitions of our ancient ancestors, who were apparently a stupid bunch, but of course we know better, who had a low IQ and thus did not use logic and science to help them in their lives, but put everything down to gods and superstition. Is it all an irrational belief to believe in a god? Irrational belief, according to the dictionary, old wives' tales, myth, misconceptions, delusions, fallacies, factoids. But what has God ever done for me? I hear many people say. Well, God gave you life, and he also, in his infinite wisdom, gave you free will. Free will. You can change your will to walk with God. After free will, what have you ever done for God? What you can do is explained in the cathedrals and churches. Be the best human being you could possibly be. A human being. The verb is the clue. A human being. A true human. A being human. The ancient wisdom has been with us possibly since mankind began. Possibly started in a golden age, when religious illumination led the way. But a catastrophe seemed to have taken away what the mystery schools and the hidden teaching, or was it in plain sight, as it is today in the cathedrals, seemed to disappear and go underground. But that religious illumination is still there for one and all. It's like a switch, you can turn it on or off. I've gone with various friends over the years to churches and cathedrals and noticed how uncomfortable they look, or how bored, or how they want to get away quickly. Why is this? Well, that could be a number of reasons. Maybe they just need to take a moment and sit silent in a cathedral, see if they can hear the word of God. Lost souls in a cathedral. So many lost souls. Also, there are so many who do not realize they have lost their soul. The icons, art and symbolism in a cathedral might not be plain speech to the exoteric, but it will make an impression on the subconscious and thus work its way into the esoteric, and hopefully the subconscious then tries to weave its way up to the conscious and give signals for one to check on one's soul. Yet those that need these messages, the soulless, are not going to go visit a cathedral anytime soon, and the only time they go to a church or a cathedral is for a wedding or a funeral. And in the case of both of these, they don't need to attend such places anymore. People can get married almost anywhere these days, and one can have a no-fuss funeral, which offers, and I quote, a more modern, simpler funeral without the ceremonial elements associated with a traditional funeral, end quote. A non-religious funeral is being offered. No hymns, no prayers, no religious readings. Now what does that do to the soul, I wonder? Well, maybe these are the funerals soulless people have, so now I wonder that it does nothing to the soul because they don't have one. Should one pray for these soulless beings? I think so. Everybody deserves a prayer, especially as I'm concerned that without the prayers and hymns and such like, one's soul may not get the proper send-off at death, and will just be trapped in the netherworlds where the dark forces gather up all soulless beings, or the souls of those that aren't soulless, but hadn't connected with their soul, when really these souls should be going up to the heavens. The soul must rest in peace. The soul deserves to rest in peace. May these souls pass from the dark areas and find eternal peace. Cathedrals of the sun. One does not need to go to a service to be transformed, but attending a service is still service to oneself and to God. Prayers and singing praises is good for one and all. Just walking around a cathedral, sitting in a cathedral for reflection and private prayer and thought, being in the cathedral will have a subtle impact on oneself. I often spend time in a cathedral and my aches and pains, my heaviness of heart and thought slowly disappear, and the effect continues for some days afterwards.
O everlasting God, who has ordained and constituted the services of angels and men in a wonderful order, mercifully grant that as thy holy angels always do their service in heaven, so by thy appointment they may secure and defend us on earth through Jesus Christ our Lord.